Welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. Well, I hate to break it to you leftoids, but I think it's pretty clear at this point that RFK Jr.'s presence on the ballot isn't going to help you in the way that you think it will. Democrats saw 2 polls suggesting that RFK Jr. was pulling support from Trump, and they thought it undid 7 months of polling history. 2 outlier polls, the entire trend BTFO'd. And of course, this morning, the first video I recorded was the latest CNN poll, which once again confirms the trend that that's exactly what's happening. RFK Jr. is pulling support from Joe Biden. But that was the polling analysis part. Let's delve a little bit deeper into this phenomenon. Leftists actually believe that this guy is going to pull Republican voters. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. Let me show you guys exactly what I mean by that. I really like RFK Jr. I think he's genuine. I think he's a whole lot more genuine than Bernie Sanders, but you know, this just ain't it. At least ain't it if you're a conservative or conservative-minded. Let me show you guys exactly what's going on. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. All right, folks. So, like I said, leftists actually think that Trump voters are going to go for this guy.
The solution of having the state come in and dictate choices that, you know, that the woman is making is not, that's not a good solution to me. That have a bureaucrat making these very, very difficult moral choices. I think that choice should be between the woman, her pastor, her spiritual advisors, the people who she consults in her life, and that it's a very, very difficult decision.
So you don't believe that the child has an independent right to life, for example, at any point during the pregnancy? I mean, how far does the right to choice
here's what I would say, man. There's no woman who has who gets pregnant, carries that baby for 8 months, and then decides to have an abortion for some frivolous reason. They're in that kind of case, and nobody in their right mind would do that. In those kind of cases, there's some kind of those very, very rare cases where that happens. There's always some kind of extenuating circumstances.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. RFK Jr. repeatedly refuses to stand publicly against late-term abortions. And this has been his stance for a long time. You know, there's a lot of things that are not palatable to the American electorate, to general voters. And a lot of the times the conversation is focused on the pro-life people. Let's say pro-life absolutists, those who want an outright federal ban on abortion, completely illegal in all cases, sometimes exceptions. You know, that's viewed as the extreme, non-palatable political perspective, but late-term abortions, well, I'd say showing support in that direction is arguably a much worse stance, and this is what RFK Jr. is doing. He's taking the John Fetterman approach, that it's between that person, their doctor, their pastor. We've heard that argument before, and he tries to justify it by saying he doesn't believe that the state should be involved. But if there's anything the state should be involved in, at least in my view, it's protecting life. Whether that's protecting your life through public safety measures, you know, convicting murderers, running watch, keeping safe neighborhoods, or whether it's protecting life in the womb, the idea that states shouldn't involve themselves in these matters seems completely ridiculous to me, especially when the state is representing the electoral will of that state. If people are voting on a referendum and the overwhelming majority of the electorate decides to support legislation that would protect life in the womb, that's not state overreach, that's democracy in action. I don't think that's a good argument to make. He goes on to say, well, no one's actually doing it. Well, just because no one's actually doing it or very few people are doing it doesn't mean that it should remain legal. He also claims it's a very complex moral conundrum. Is it really? I don't think it is. I think it's pretty clear that this medical procedure being performed in the late terms is obviously very concerning morally and ethically, and there's clearly a right and a wrong side, at least from my view. And again, I think state electorates have the right to make that moral decision as a collective through democratic processes. This is a stance that in my view is indefensible. The arguments sound good on a surface level, but once you peer in, they're like Swiss cheese, there's holes all over. And really, I could keep going. You know, he seems to base the premise of his stance on the idea that it's the woman's choice, that it's her body, that the state shouldn't regulate her body. But in order for that to be true, you have to completely disregard the life living inside the woman as a life. You have to disregard that life. I, for one, am not willing to do that. And again, like I say, my view is not a religious one, and I don't even have the most staunch pro-life view. I'm more in favor of a 6 to 10 week ban. That's what I view as finding a middle ground. But even I am appalled by the stripping of humanity that we see in these arguments. You have a living, breathing living creature living inside a woman, and people want to formulate the argument as if that isn't a life, as if that isn't a body that will eventually be independent of the mother. Just because it isn't currently independent, just because it's a dependent being, doesn't mean it's not life. And this view that we should just be snuffing out potential life because it may be an inconvenience on the mother due to her circumstance, well, frankly, that feels barbaric. It feels wrong. You know, when people like Bill Maher make arguments like this,
scold the left on when they say, oh, you know what, they just hate women, people who aren't pro-life, pro-choice, they don't hate women. They just made that up. They think it's murder, and it kind of is. I'm just okay with that. I am. I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world. I'm sorry, we won't miss you. That's my position on it. What?
Yeah, I just don't see myself jumping on that bandwagon. It seems very nihilistic, selfish, and wrong. That's just my perspective. I think that's a lot of people's perspective, whether you're in the center, probably some Democrats. Actually, a lot of Democrats, if you look at the polling numbers, the majority of voters across the board don't support second trimester abortions. That's after 13 weeks. So in the middle, on the left, and Republicans and conservatives as well, you know, this is a stance that I think is very alienating to people. It's very concerning. RFK Jr. isn't going to appeal to right-wingers like some people pretend. He's a libertarian far leftist, that's my view, who I think doesn't appeal to Trump voters at all. Actually, here's another example.
He got rolled by his bureaucrats.
I mean, I think that a lot of people who support President Trump, myself included, will believe that he got rolled by his own state.
Yeah,
and that's why 2020 was a disaster.
We need somebody in there who will not get rolled by their bureaucrats. This is what my uncle, when my uncle was president during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there were 13 people on the ex-com committee who were, living at the White House, including my father, who got a cot at the White House, and we didn't see him for 13 days. He went granular, and then the last day, after the 13th day, this is the 13th most dangerous days in history. There are many times during that period that many of those people believe that they may wake up dead the next morning, because a nuclear exchange would wipe out the East Coast.
The way I'd sum up that clip is here you have RFK Jr. saying that Trump doesn't deserve a second term because he got railroaded by the uniparty Washington swamp. I find him weak on the issue of defending Donald Trump away from this clear government corruption and pulling of the strings, which is concerning considering he's a Kennedy. Considering his family's history in this matter, you would think he'd be a little bit more sympathetic, no? But anyways, just another issue that's not going to appeal to the Trump base. I like this guy. I like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I think he's an important voice, but he is not a conservative voice. He is not a voice for the MAGA people. He's an alternative leftist. He's not pulling votes away from Trump. I think quite the contrary. I think he's going to decimate Joe Biden's chances in a lot of these key swing states. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.